For years, Karl Weiss was seen as a hard-working rancher, a proud son of Bavaria, tending to his vast farmland and raising cattle under the clear German skies. The locals admired him, the government rewarded him, and the banks trusted him. But what they didn't know was that Karl's entire empire was built on a house of lies. In a country known for its strict regulations and meticulous bookkeeping, Karl had found a way to game the system. He had discovered a loophole so perfect that it allowed him to steal $10 million in government subsidies, and for 5 years, no one suspected a thing. Until now, Karl Weiss never planned to be a criminal. At least, that's what he told himself. Once, he was an honest man, waking up at dawn, working tirelessly to keep his cattle healthy and his crops thriving. But the 2000 financial crisis had crippled small farmers like him. The German government had promised subsidies, loans, and financial aid, but the process was slow, bureaucratic, and riddled with corruption. While large corporate farms received millions, independent farmers like Karl barely got scraps. One evening, while drowning in debt and facing foreclosure, Karl sat in his dimly lit farmhouse, sifting through documents. That's when he saw it, a small loophole in the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, CAP. It was an innocent oversight, a minor detail, something most farmers overlooked. But Karl's mind worked differently. What if he could exploit it? The birth of a multi-million-dollar scam, the plan started small. Karl falsified a few documents, exaggerating the size of his farmland by a few hectares. It was easy. No one checked the fine print. The money flowed in within weeks, not much, but enough to cover his debts. That was when Karl realized something. The system was built on trust. What if he claimed more land? What if he registered additional farms that didn't exist? What if he invented thousands of cattle that were never born? And so, Karl Weiss, the simple rancher, became Karl Weiss, the master conman. Over the next 5 years, Karl constructed an elaborate web of deception. He bribed local officials to rubber stamp his applications. He hired fake employees to pose as ranch hands for non-existent farms. He created fictional livestock records, reporting 5,000 cattle when he barely had 500. He used satellite images of abandoned land, claiming them as his property. Every year, the government pumped millions into his bank account, believing he was one of Germany's most successful ranchers. Karl didn't just survive, he thrived. His old, debt-ridden farm transformed into a luxury estate. His battered truck was replaced with a sleek black Mercedes-Benz. He took expensive vacations, dined in 5-star restaurants, and invested in Swiss bank accounts. To the outside world, he was a self-made success story, a man who had risen from financial ruin to become one of Bavaria's leading agricultural businessmen. But deep inside, Karl knew the truth. He was living on borrowed time. For years, Karl's scheme was flawless. But no scam lasts forever. One afternoon, as Karl relaxed in his spacious office, sipping whiskey and overlooking the vast green fields he didn't actually own, he received a call from the Agricultural Ministry. A new auditing team had been assigned to review subsidy distributions. Karl felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't normal. The government never conducted audits on large-scale farms, especially not ones that had been receiving funding for years. Something was wrong. Had someone talked? Had the government noticed an inconsistency? Had they finally connected the dots? As he hung up the phone, Karl knew one thing for certain: his empire of lies was about to be tested. And if he wasn't careful, everything would come crashing down. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories. For years, Karl Weiss had built his fortune on lies, forged documents, and loopholes, becoming one of Germany's wealthiest ranchers without actually owning half the land he claimed. But now, the walls were closing in. A government audit had been ordered. The system Karl had once manipulated so easily was now watching him closely. Would he outsmart them one last time? Or was this the beginning of his downfall? The letter that changed everything. The official notice arrived in the mail one morning. A government investigation into farm subsidies, a review of every grant Karl had received in the last 5 years. His heart pounded as he read the letter. They were sending auditors to inspect his ranches. Satellite records, cattle logs, employee payrolls, all of it would be under scrutiny. Carl had 2 weeks before the inspection. He had 2 choices: flee with the stolen millions before they uncovered his fraud. Fight and try to cover his tracks. Carl wasn't the type to run away. Instead, he doubled down. Carl immediately called in favors. He paid local officials to lose certain records before the auditors could find them. He hired temporary workers to act as farmhands, pretending to take care of livestock that didn't exist. He moved cattle from other farms onto his land, creating the illusion of a full ranch. He repainted old buildings, placed fresh hay in empty barns, and even scattered fake cow manure to make everything look authentic. It was a risky, last-minute operation, but Carl was a master of deception. By the time the government auditors arrived, everything looked perfect. At least, that's what Carl thought. Carl Weiss had spent years deceiving the government, stealing millions in subsidies, and building an empire on fraud. But now, as he stood frozen at the gates of his estate, staring at the black SUV, he knew the game was over. Or was it? 2 men from the German Ministry of Agriculture stepped onto Carl's land. They were seasoned investigators, trained to spot fraud from a mile away. At first, Carl played his usual role, the charismatic rancher, the hard-working businessman, the man who just wanted to provide for his family. He took them on a carefully planned tour, showing them healthy cattle, busy farmhands, and perfectly maintained land. But the auditors weren't fools. They asked specific questions about breeding cycles, veterinary reports, and feed purchases that didn't match the number of cattle Carl claimed. Carl laughed it off, blaming clerical errors, misplaced invoices, and outdated records. But then, one of the auditors took out a tablet. "We've been reviewing satellite images of your farmland over the last 5 years," he said. Carl felt his stomach drop. The screen showed a barren field, one that Carl had claimed was full of crops for the last 3 years. "This land has been empty. You've been receiving subsidies for farmland that doesn't exist," the auditor said, staring straight into Carl's eyes. Carl's hands trembled, but he forced a smile. "That's absurd," he said. "Maybe the images are old." The auditor didn't blink. "This image is from last week." Carl felt the first real crack in his carefully built empire. As the audit continued, Carl's nerves frayed. He had handled paperwork fraud before, but satellite records? He needed more time to cover his tracks. Then, something even worse happened. The auditors mentioned that they had received an anonymous tip. Someone from inside Carl's operation had spoken up. Someone had betrayed him. Was it one of the farmhands who realized the truth? A government official who took his bribes but got scared? Or was it a rival farmer, tired of watching Carl steal millions? Whoever it was, they had provided documents, real documents that exposed massive inconsistencies in Carl's subsidy claims. For the first time, Carl felt trapped. He wasn't controlling the game anymore. That night, Carl sat in his office, staring at a suitcase full of cash. He had 2 options left: stay and fight, risking arrest and prison time, or disappear, vanish into thin air before the authorities could take him down. The next morning, Carl emptied his bank accounts, sold off whatever assets he could, and wired millions to offshore accounts. Then, he called his most trusted contact, the one man who could get him out of Germany without a trace. A fake passport, a plane ticket, and a single phone call. That's all he needed. But Carl forgot one thing. The government wasn't just watching his farms. They were watching him too. As Carl stepped out of his estate, ready to flee, a black SUV pulled up outside his gates. The doors opened, and the men inside weren't here for a friendly chat. Carl's heart pounded. He had prepared for this moment, but he didn't expect them to come this fast. The SUV's doors opened. 2 men in black suits stepped out. Not uniformed police, government agents. "Carl Weiss?" one of them asked. Carl forced a smile, trying to stay calm. "Yes? How can I help you?" "You need to come with us," the man said, his expression unreadable. Carl hesitated. Run or comply? Running meant admitting guilt. Complying might give him a chance to negotiate. With a slow nod, He stepped forward, clutching the suitcase full of cash tighter. They didn't arrest him. Not yet. Instead, they brought him to a government facility. Inside, he was led to a stark, windowless room. A single table, 2 chairs, a dim overhead light. The investigator sat across from him, placing a file on the table. Then, with deliberate calmness, he opened it. Inside were documents, bank statements, and satellite images. Proof of fraud, forgery, and deception. "You've been busy," the investigator said, flipping through the pages. Carl leaned back, trying to appear unfazed. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The investigator smirked. "That's funny, because someone else does." Then, he pulled out a second file, this one marked confidential. He slid it across the table and opened it. Inside was a photo of Carl's most trusted employee, someone who had been by his side for years, someone who knew everything. Carl's stomach dropped. It was his accountant, the man who had helped him forge documents, move money, and cover his tracks. Carl's mind raced. How? Why? The investigator answered before Carl could even ask. "He came to us first," he said, tapping the photo. "Said he wanted a deal." Carl felt rage boiling inside him. He had paid this man generously, trusted him with everything, and now, for his own freedom, the accountant had sold him out. The betrayal stung more than the threat of prison. Carl clenched his fists, but the investigator wasn't finished. "You have 2 choices here, Weiss," he said, leaning forward. "Fight this case in court and spend the rest of your life behind bars. Or help us take down others like you." Carl stared at the man, his mind spinning. Prison? Or betrayal? If he fought, he'd lose everything. But if he turned informant, he could cut a deal. Save some of his fortune. Maybe even walk free one day. It wasn't a difficult choice. He leaned forward, his lips curling into a smirk. "I think we can make a deal," Carl said. Within months, Carl exposed dozens of fraudulent ranches, leading to one of the biggest government crackdowns on farm subsidies in German history. His sentence was reduced, but he still spent 5 years in prison. By the time he was released, the world had changed, and so had he. He had money hidden overseas, a new identity, and a plan to disappear for good. No longer Carl Weiss, no longer a fraud, just a ghost, living off the millions he had managed to keep. Or so he thought. Because once you've stolen from the government, they never stop watching.